Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark. Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. Today, we're continuing on with part 3 of my response to Matt's 40-minute response to evolution. Last time, Matt forced me into making clams for dinner so that I could show how easy it is to close one after it's dead. I say that as if it wasn't delicious. Clams are yummy. What life choices will I make based on Matt's claims this week? The only way to know for sure is to watch. Liking and subscribing would help too. And now that you've already liked the video, which is something that you totally can't take back, a word from our sponsor, Surfshark. Are you getting tired of scrolling through your streaming services, not being able to find something new and interesting to watch? Do you live in one of the states that has overly intrusive controls over streaming sites featuring specific types of, shall we say, spicy content? Well then have I got a solution for you. Surfshark VPN is a virtual private network which allows you to appear to be connected to the internet from any location where Surfshark has a server. By connecting through Surfshark, you can access streaming services from different geographic locations. This means you may have access to additional libraries of movies and TV shows not available in your home area. But that's not all they do. With their Clean Web 2.0 features, you can automatically block ads, reject unwanted cookies without fumbling through the pop-up first, get alerts when a website was the target of a data breach, and block malware. Like, seriously, I've said this before and I fully stand by it. If Clean Web 2.0 were the only product that they offered, that would be more than worth the price just for getting rid of the cookies pop-up. But considering you also get a VPN that adds an extra layer of encryption to your data, keeping you safe when connected to public networks, even if they have been compromised, it's a steal. Surfshark VPN is easy to use and simple to install, doesn't monitor, track, or store your data, and it works on phones, tablets, and laptops with no extra fees. They offer a 30-day money-back guarantee so you can try it out completely risk-free. Secure your privacy with Surfshark. Enter coupon code RHINO for an extra 4 months free at surfshark.deals/rhino. Again, that's surfshark.deals/RHINO. Enter promo code RHINO for an extra 4 months free. This is a limited time offer, so sign up today. And remember, by signing up for Surfshark VPN, you're helping to support my channel. Thank you.
They claim that dinosaurs once crossed oceans.
Crossing oceans is a bit of a stretch here. They found hadrosaurs in northern Africa. Hadrosaurs, before this find, were thought to be limited to Europe, Asia, and North America. At the time the hadrosaurs lived, Pangaea had split into the two continents of Laurasia and Gondwana. The location of this particular find suggests that the hadrosaurs had somehow managed to cross the Tethys Sea that separated those two continents. At its widest, the Tethys was about half the width of the widest part of the Atlantic, between 2,000 and 3,000 kilometers. But the hadrosaur dispersal would have happened across a much shorter distance of about 500 kilometers. Not only was it a relatively short distance, they were possibly aided by numerous islands along the way. But also, as the paper that's being cited by the article that Matt is showing points out, we know of several instances of animals colonizing locations that required them to cross sometimes vast distances in water. Hadrosaurs had adaptations that likely would have made them stronger swimmers than most modern mammals, including polar bears, which have been observed on at least one occasion to swim a distance of over 600 kilometers. But even if they weren't strong swimmers, hippos, which despite their aquatic lifestyle are actually terrible swimmers, managed to cross the Mozambique Channel, which at its narrowest is more than 300 kilometers wide, in order to get to Madagascar. So the idea that some animals crossed a relatively wide channel is not really that far of a stretch.
They say the first duck-billed dinosaur fossil was discovered in Africa, so again, you have an instance where dinosaur fossils are found out of place.
No, this isn't out of place. This is in an unexpected place. Out of place would be more along the lines of finding a fossil of a modern-looking dog in 500-million-year-old Cambrian rock. Finding an animal in a new location, but in a time where they are known to have existed, is not terribly groundbreaking. I mean, it's insightful and provides us with valuable data when it comes to reconstructing ancient ecosystems, but it doesn't rock the evolutionary boat.
What do we believe? Do we believe they surfed over there, or do we believe that Noah's flood put these fossils in these positions?
As I pointed out last time, nobody is saying that they surfed there. Surfing is not the same as swimming, drifting, and rafting. So the real question is, do we believe that they did a thing which we've seen animals do on occasion? Or do we believe in a clearly mythological story that the ancient Hebrews adapted from earlier Sumerian myths?
Noah's flood is the explanation for all of these things, and if you don't believe in Noah's flood, then this is what you're left with. You have to believe stuff like this, and I want to encourage you to be rational and logical and not believe things that are based in lies.
Yeah, I know. It's so irrational of me to believe that animals in the past could do some things that animals in the present have been observed doing. But hey, I gotta stick with this irrational explanation if I want to continue in my sinful ways, right? Like, my ability to do butt stuff is directly linked to my beliefs about how a hadrosaur got from Laurasia to Gondwana, after all.
And some biological organisms are so unique from others that even Darwinists will claim that they could not have evolved by Darwinian means.
You mean the Darwinification of the Darwinian Darwinism didn't Darwinize Darwinly? My Darwin, we may just have to re-Darwin this whole Darwin thing.
And so squids and octopi are some of those creatures that many claim could not have evolved, so they have to explain how they got here.
Oh, I know where this is going. Many, in this case, is the single team of researchers who proposed in 2018 that cephalopod DNA arrived on Earth via fertilized octopus eggs traveling through space via meteorite. To the rest of the relevant scientific community, this paper is summed up nicely by a statement made by the curator of the Oxford Museum of Natural History, Mark Carnall. This paper is firmly pseudoscience and nonsense. I'm not 100% convinced it isn't a hoax it's that deliberately bad. When it comes to cephalopods, at best, it's the flimsiest of hypotheses propped up by a misreading of a handful of references with little in the way of justification for why these hypotheses are important. Okay, now with that out of the way, go ahead and tell me that one poorly written paper that was nearly universally lampooned by the scientific community is what everyone who accepts evolution has to believe.
And in this paper here, in Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, it states this, that it's plausible then to suggest that they seem to be borrowed from a far distant future, quote unquote, in terms of terrestrial evolution, or more realistically from the cosmos at large.
Yep, that's the paper. What justification do they use for that conclusion? Essentially none. Their line of reasoning is based on one other study that looked at the genetics of 12 individual organisms, with only one octopus getting a full genome sequencing, everything else being fragmentary. From this, they saw that there are some differences between the RNA modification sites in those 12 organisms as compared to some distantly related organisms. Therefore, fertilized eggs from space are responsible! If that seems like a massive and unjustified jump in logic to you, that's because it is. Matt finally cites an actual paper rather than a news article, and it's one that is universally dismissed as unreasonable, unevidenced, pseudoscientific nonsense. Also, the primary author on that paper seems to be the kind of hack who just likes to conclude that anything even remotely unexplained just bamfed its way to Earth from space. He published a paper in 2020 that concluded that COVID-19 came from space. In that same paper, he also heavily implies, while avoiding saying directly, that HIV and Spanish flu also came from space. So yeah, everything's from space. All of it.
So what they're claiming is that octopi and squid are so unique that they couldn't have evolved, so they must be aliens. And the theory is that they rode through the atmosphere on a comet, which would have toasted them.
Yep. That's the theory. It's actually weird that they landed on actual octopus eggs being on the comet rather than retroviruses, given that they talk about retroviruses playing a key role in their hypothesis in other parts of the paper. Because honestly, the idea that a retrovirus could survive interplanetary or interstellar travel, frozen in ice on a comet, and then successfully be revived once that comet hits a planet, is way more plausible than their actual claim of fertilized octopus eggs doing the same. I mean, you'd still have the problem of just how unlikely it would be for extraterrestrial genetics to be in any way compatible with terrestrial genetics in the first place, but at least there is precedent for extremophiles from Earth being able to survive in space. Cephalopods are so notoriously difficult to raise in captivity and even more difficult to breed that the idea of their eggs surviving in the much more harsh conditions provided by outer space is just downright ludicrous.
It's much easier to say that God created them.
Well, we dealt with this more in the first video, but it is worth restating. Being easier to say does not mean it is more likely to be true. And actually, honestly, octopuses came from space is significantly easier to say than God created them and then somehow protected them from the physically impossible worldwide flood that he used to wipe out all land creatures. So in this case, you don't even win the syntactic simplicity side of the argument.
Actually, it takes rational thought to understand that God created them. Some people actually think that dinosaurs farted themselves to death.
We have reached the age of the dinosaurs with volcanoes and tar pits and primeval forests, but how could such huge and powerful creatures have all disappeared? Dad, is that why they call it extinction? Huh. What do you know? This book aimed at prepubescent children does say that dinosaurs farted themselves to death. I mean, it also says that the universe farted itself into existence, that land animals evolved in order to escape a fish fart, and that the end of the Ice Age was because of a mammoth farting, but hey, learn something new every day.
No joke, you can look it up.
Yeah, no, that's not what the paper says. I mean, that is what the news article says, because news articles gonna do what news articles do. They'll get more clicks for dinosaurs farted themselves to extinction than dinosaur farts may have contributed to the Mesozoic being warm. But if you read the paper, that is the conclusion. Given an assumed number of herbivores, and given what we know of metabolism, it is possible that herbivore metabolism is responsible for 2 to 4 parts per million of methane in the atmosphere of the time, which is enough to impact the climate. That's all it is. Extinction is mentioned a grand total of once in the whole paper. And it's not even about dinosaurs when it mentions it. It's about how humans driving megafauna to extinction corresponded with a global decrease of methane levels, thus supporting the idea that more animals producing more gases can increase methane levels. That's all they were saying.
It is really wild. I actually called some people out on that who were saying that to others. There was a group of people, I think it was RT, they said that this somehow proves that the Creation Museum is ridiculous and creation science is false.
I mean, the Creation Museum is ridiculous, and creation science is false, and the data that was used in the dinosaur farting paper to arrive at its conclusions certainly is a part of what proves that to be the case. But I doubt very much that some group called RT used the news article that you are showing as the basis for the claim that creationism is ridiculous and false. That just, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that one. Screenshots or it didn't happen.
Because dinosaurs passed too much gas and killed themselves off with their own flatulence.
Sounds like Matt's been huffing too much Jenkem. Take it easy with that stuff, buddy. I know it can give you a sense of euphoria, but it comes with a very real risk of brain damage. Which would explain a lot, actually.
Some of these theories are really wild, and some people do actually believe them.
Some people believe that Jewish space lasers start wildfires. Some people believe that reptiles in human costumes rule the Earth. Some people believe that the Earth is flat. Some people believing a goofy thing does not have any bearing on the truth of evolution.
And in this kid's book, you can see here it says, question, are chickens related to the T-Rex? Answer, yes. Science has revealed compelling evidence that the T-Rex actually evolved into a chicken.
Matt, I implore you, please, ask yourself why you had to go to a children's book for that. I can find you a kid's book that says all sorts of stupid shit. Hell, let's flip this. In this kid's book, you can see here that it says that Jesus went to John the Baptist to have his sins washed away. So according to this kid's book, Jesus had sins that needed to be washed away before he could begin his ministry. So clearly, Matt believes that Jesus was a sinner because this kid's book says so. So, chicken and T-Rex. No, the chicken is not a descendant of the T-Rex. Yes, the chicken and the T-Rex are related. All living things are related, so that's kind of a no-brainer. Now, is the chicken the T-Rex's closest living relative? I doubt it's the closest, but whatever it is, it will be a bird of some kind, because birds are theropod dinosaurs. T-Rex was also a theropod dinosaur, but that's a big category that contained a lot of diversity. But it wasn't too long ago that a group of birds called the terror birds existed. They were basically mini T-Rexes, bigger than humans, but smaller than the T-Rex, and they are unquestionably birds. If you can't see how those things could be related to other non-avian theropods, then that's a you problem, buddy.
So from Jurassic Park's worst monster to lunch at KFC, that's what they think.
Okay, first and foremost, Jurassic Park's worst monster was obviously the Velociraptor, not the T-Rex. But no, that was what one children's author thinks, and what they think is not in line with the scientific consensus, so that is not what we all think.
They literally think that chickens are descendants of dinosaurs. And some of them will say, well, every bird in the sky is a dinosaur.
Well, yeah, that part is true. Chickens, and all other birds, are not just descended from dinosaurs, they are theropod dinosaurs themselves. It's just a matter of cladistics.
Let's go ahead and get back on track.
He says that as though he didn't come prepared with supplemental material and screenshots of children's books for what he is now pretending was an off-the-cuff tangent. God, what kind of loser scripts out every moment of his video, including the off-topic tangents, and then pretends when he's recording that it was an accidental diversion? What an idiotic thing to do. I'd never stoop to such things, of course. Nope. Not me.
So in the creation model, we believe that mankind was designed, but in evolution they teach that humans descended from primates.
And to reiterate, humans are primates by definition. So if you descended from humans, congratulations! You also descended from primates, because that's what those words mean. You might not like those definitions, but that just makes you wrong.
And I don't have long to get into this because this is kind of just a basic seminar. It has a lot of basics in it.
Indeed, Matt. Ya basic.
We don't really go super deep into any of these topics, though we could.
No, you couldn't. I've seen you try to do deep dives on things. Never goes well for you.
But I'd like to point out that it's very rational to understand that two humans conceived the world's population.
Well, given that genetic research has shown the minimum viable population size for mammals is somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 individuals, yes, it is irrational to believe that the whole human population originated with just 2 individuals.
And that we didn't descend from primates.
Again, we are primates, so even if your little Adam and Eve story were true, we descended from the primates called Adam and Eve.
And some people are now claiming that one of our earliest ancestors was a jellyfish.
I doubt it. It's more likely that the claim is that one of our earliest ancestors was a jellyfish-like creature, because modern jellyfish weren't around long enough ago for us to have been descended from them. Though there has been some evidence to suggest that comb jellies rather than sponges are the sister group to all other animals. My guess is that at this point, Matt is simply going to point out that he thinks that sounds rather silly, therefore it can't possibly be true, because reality itself must bend to adhere to the things that Matt himself is capable of believing. Like, just imagine being so self-absorbed that upon learning of something that you thought sounds impossible but is very heavily supported by evidence, rather than taking even a moment to consider the fact that your prior evaluation might have been wrong, you insist that, no, I can't be wrong, it's reality that's wrong. Not even C.S. motherfucking Lewis, who intentionally wrote the main characters of his book to be as bland and one-dimensional as possible in order to make the story about Aslan and Narnia rather than the actual characters, didn't stoop to that level. If Matt Powell wrote Narnia, then when Peter and Susan finally make it through the wardrobe, they just look around, say, oh, that's impossible, and then head right back out again. Book over, turns out Narnia wasn't real in the first place.
What do they teach in schools these days?
What makes more sense? Come on. That a jellyfish conceived all of mankind over time? That somehow a family of jellyfish turned into a family of people over a bunch of successive generations? Or that 2 people conceived the world population?
Again, your personal incredulity aside, the jellyfish. Along with the earlier caveat about modern jellyfish not being literally the thing that is the ancestor to all animals. And this conclusion is because of that same minimal viable population size thing. And honestly, if you're going to go reductio ad absurdum, I can do better than you. Jellyfish had descendants that were all a little bit different from their parents, which over countless generations spanning hundreds of millions of years led to the diversity of modern animal life, is way more believable than cosmic sorcerer who existed before anything spoke, despite there being no medium to carry sound waves, and that speech magically created everything, including the sorcerer's arch nemesis, the talking snake. So the sorcerer planted a tree that he didn't want anyone to touch in the middle of a garden where it would be easily accessible. Then he made a guy out of dirt and told him not to touch the tree. Then he made a woman out of the piece of the man, but didn't tell her to not touch the tree. So when the talking snake told her to eat some of that obviously yummy fruit, she did, which made the sorcerer angry. So he kicked both of them out of the garden, otherwise they'd be able to eat from the live forever tree, and that, combined with eating from the first tree, would make them equally powerful sorcerers. And we all know that sorcerers hate competition, but eventually it bummed the sorcerer out that he wouldn't get to hang out with the people he created, so he impregnated a teenager, became his own son, and killed himself so that people who believe in him can come and live with him after they die. Yeah, That's what you believe. That's literally what you believe. Also, no word on why living forever after death doesn't count as being a god, but living forever by eating the fruit while you're alive does.
Adam and Eve were real people who actually existed in the past.
Now, do you have any evidence to support that? Aside from your already stated, I find this story to be easier to believe than the well-evidenced findings of generations of the most highly educated people on the planet? Or are we just going along with the intuition of someone who is so consistently idiotic that they are the only person I've ever dedicated a montage of idiocy to?
But in space, wouldn't it be a different scenario based on the fact that, the space and the air in the space is much different than the air we have here?
They believe that rocks evolved, that you had smaller rocks that somehow morphed into larger rocks.
That out of his mouth go burning lamps and sparks of fire leap out. The dinosaurs they discovered have, the dragons they've discovered have chambers in the back of their head. It's where they can breathe fire. But that's just a couple things. I mean,
if it's about survival of the fittest and we evolved from African Americans into other Americans, what about the African Americans that are still alive today?
well, I don't see anything wrong with quote mining. I believe if we study history, the Confederates were able to shoot pterodactyls.
T-Rex, they had short, stubby arms. And apparently now the chicken's able to do a handstand with those arms.
Think about this. We have more in common genetically in certain areas with a gorilla than with an ape. Yet they say genetically we evolved from apes. We can tell based on genetics.
Honestly, John, I don't know a ton of technical terms. I'm very simple when it comes to science. I just enjoy simple science.
And the alternative to Adam and Eve is the assertion that biological organisms somehow came alive in the water. Remember, water destroys them.
Yeah, I'm gonna refer you back to the first video in the series for my more detailed response to that, but for now, suffice it to say that Matt just seems completely unaware of the fact that drinking water is a thing that living things do all the damn time, because water is actually necessary for life as we know it.
But even if we enter into fantasy land and pretend that it's true, that water created this organic material that turned into life, and all of this life started to diversify, mutations would have killed these organisms before they could have even diversified.
Mutations are literally one of the diversification mechanisms, so no.
They teach in evolution that we mutated from a single-celled organism to humans over time.
Not in so simplistic a fashion, but yes. Honestly, the way you said it is more akin to the reproductive process. When a sperm meets an egg, it forms a single cell. Then, over the course of 9 months, that one cell evolves into a fully blown human being. Matt seems incredulous at the idea that a single cell could ever become a human being, but it happens all the damn time. And it happens so easily that people spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars per year in order to avoid it happening.
Mutations are the reasons for cancer, Down syndrome, and autism. Sickle cell anemia.
Fun fact about cancer being caused by mutations is that if we're looking at the individual cells, the mutations are a sequence of 3 to 6 mutations that have to happen in that cell's evolutionary lineage, and the mutations serve to make that cell capable of near unlimited reproduction and immortality. In other words, cancer is almost an evolutionary atavism, where an individual cell puts itself back in time before multicellular organisms when it had to compete for resources with the other cells around it. And since all the cells around it are part of a cohesive multicellular organism, the cancerous cells survive by cheating the system. What I'm saying here is that cancer is an evolutionary microcosm. The interesting thing about the cause of Down syndrome is that our study of Down syndrome has actually led directly to progression in cancer research. Down syndrome occurs when an individual has an extra copy of chromosome 21. When genes are overexpressed, it can have a drastic change on a person's body, but figuring out which genes are responsible for which changes is a tricky business because there are so many interactions between the various genes and so many steps between the gene being expressed and the effect being studied. With Down syndrome, there's a whole chromosome that will pretty much definitionally be overexpressed. So eventually, researchers realized that people with Down syndrome have significantly lower rates of cancer. This realization led to the discovery that several genes, when overexpressed, have a protective effect against cancer. As for autism, I'm still fairly new to the personal experience aspect of autism, having one child that was just diagnosed this year, and another that is going through the process, but the doctor wants to get their ADHD symptoms managed before getting the screening done. And yes, just as a disclaimer, they have both given me permission to talk about it. The cause of autism isn't as cut and dried as it was a mutation. There almost certainly is a genetic factor. In fact, there is certainly a genetic factor, but there are also environmental factors at play as well. But genetic causes aside, let's look at the implication of what he's saying here. Evolution can't happen because mutations cause cancer. Cancer is literally your own body evolving to outcompete itself, and on top of that, it usually happens as a result of mutations that happen during a person's lifetime, rather than an embryonic mutation making them more susceptible to cancer, though that certainly plays a role as well. But what this means is that, in most cases, cancer doesn't happen until after the person who gets it has already passed their reproductive prime. They've already had their babies, and likely raised them to a point where they have babies of their own now. As far as evolution is concerned, it's done with you. No need to continue improving on that. All it needs is for you to have had babies that have had babies, and you've done that. So why should it bother to select against rogue cells seeking immortality for themselves? So far from being a problem for evolution, cancer is almost certainly an expected outcome of evolution. That aside, looking at the rest of what you said here, it essentially boils down to people with Down syndrome and autistic people may as well be dead. And as the parent of at least one autistic kid, that's a fucking gross thing to say, Matt. And of course then there's sickle cell anemia, a mutation that became the poster child of beneficial mutations, as having one copy of the sickle cell gene protects against malaria, so that's evolution in action, I guess. How's that evidence against evolution?
All of these things are caused by mutations.
Yep, and as easy as it would have been to find exclusively detrimental mutations if you knew the first thing about looking shit up, you couldn't even avoid listing mutations that have obvious benefits, like surviving malaria, or in the case of autism, potentially inventing civilization in the first place. Like, seriously, I know it's kind of a meme, but have you ever seen an autistic person focus on something that spins, particularly things like gears as they turn it over and over, watching how they all interact together, linking the cause to the effect? Officially, this is just a guess on my part, but I'm like 99% certain that pretty much every major invention came from someone on the spectrum. I just can't picture a neurotypical person getting obsessed enough with gears and mechanisms to figure out how to invent a clock, or an Archimedes screw, or, obviously, trains. Can't forget trains. Anyway, I'm not the first person to have this realization, not by a long stretch. There's a whole ass book about this exact thing, written by one of the psychologists who's been on the forefront of autism research his entire career, Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen. My point was just that you picked really bad examples. Like, just look some stuff up. And go past the first result for once.
Mutations are what cause death.
So do infections, which is why mutating yourself up an immune system was evolutionarily advantageous.
Ultimately, we will die from mutations if we live long enough as humans.
Probably not directly, but yeah, basically. Weird how God couldn't have made us more like our jellyfish cousins, some of whom have the ability to regenerate into the juvenile stage, beginning their entire life cycle again, and potentially being immortal. I guess God just loves jellies more than he loves us.
But according to Darwinists, mutations are what cause us to evolve. It's what makes us better.
Nuance, Matt. Fucking nuance. Have you heard of it? It's a hell of a thing. Not all mutations are created equal, believe it or not. There's more to it than just mutation bad.
Because beneficial mutations get selected, and those beneficial mutations benefit populations more and more and more and more, and so those organisms become better in its survival of the fittest. The fittest organisms will reproduce and create even more fit organisms.
Oh, look, he actually kinda gets it. Yes, beneficial mutations are the ones that help an organism achieve reproductive success, which is what is generally meant by fitness when talking in evolutionary terms. If a mutation increases fitness, it has a higher chance of spreading through a population. If it decreases fitness, it has a lower chance.
Well, that's not true.
Oh, fuck!
Mutations aren't going to make us evolve from a frog to a prince.
I don't understand how he is so stupid. Like, he clearly understands it well enough to explain it, sort of, but then he just finishes with, "Nuh-uh, that bad," before reducing it down to his normal incoherent babble.
Or from rocks to man.
Again, I covered this one earlier, but we evolved from rocks in the same sense that we are still rocks today. That is, there are some components that our bodies need in order to function that can be found in rocks, like sodium and iron. We have to eat those things in order to live. Our evolutionary ancestors also needed at least some of those things. So if you get to say that you think we evolved from rocks because of that, then I get to say that you think that we're still made out of rocks. Although, that said, with the whole God making Adam out of dirt thing, that's actually closer to what you actually believe than what you're saying is to what I believe. You believe some weird shit.
That's just not how it works.
Well, on that point, we agree.
That's not how biology works. That's not how science works.
Right. Science does not work by dismissing things offhandedly because a misinterpretation of the thing sounds silly if you don't actually think about it. That's a good thing.
Science shows us that everything produces after its kind.
No, it doesn't, because in order to do that, you'd have to actually define kind. That is something that no creationist has been able to do thus far. They have to keep changing their definition depending on what they're responding to, which is one of the hallmarks of an unscientific definition that is used for polemic purposes rather than investigative purposes.
And that organisms will reproduce other organisms that still remain in the family.
Incest is best, keep it in the family. That would have fit better in part 2, but he took too long to give me the setup. Like, come on, cut me some slack.
So if you have a cat, it's going to create more cats. If you have a dog, it's going to create more dogs. There are limitations to what mutations can do.
I mean, yeah, there's probably never going to be a mutation that allows an organism to survive in the center of the sun, but that's not the kind of limit that Matt's talking about here, is it? Honestly, I've never understood this argument. Like, all animals share a certain amount of genetic material, but even if they didn't, the genetic code itself is universal. Which means that if you take the genome of any organism on the planet, you could turn it into the genome of any other organism on the planet through a series of relatively simple changes. Sure, it might take you a while to get you there, and if we're talking about a person at a computer just typing A's, C's, G's, and T's, they will inevitably wind up making changes that wouldn't actually be likely in a real reproductive scenario, but the fact remains that, working one letter at a time, the genome of one organism could be turned into any other organism's genome, and I've never seen a creationist explain where the barrier is or why it exists. They seem to rely entirely on the incredulity of the audience to make their point.
Mutations can only cause us to devolve over time and not evolve.
Citation needed, motherfucker!
And this is why evolution is not true. It is not part of science. Because if you look at the human genome, you're going to find that there's more mutations in the offspring than in the parent.
Yeah, that's how accumulation works, Matt. Remember accumulation? We learned about it again in video 1, but this one actually combines with a thing called purifying selection in order to purge the deleterious mutations. So the deleterious mutations go away over time, while the neutral and positive ones build up over time. The building up of neutral ones is actually important as well, as they provide the scaffolding on which a future positive mutation can be built.
That means that mutations are accumulating, mutations cause us to die, and mutations will eventually cause us to become extinct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you believe in that whole end times thing where Jesus comes back and causes our extinction with his mouth sword thing? What kind of mutation did Jesus end up with that gave him a sword in his mouth? Was it related to the one that gives Canada geese teeth on their tongues? Because that actually makes a little bit of sense.
If the Lord doesn't come back and save us before then, which he promises to do.
Oh, okay, I see. You do believe that. You just think that mutations might get us first, even though Jesus promised to do his sword mouth thing first? Weird that you don't trust him to keep his promise, but you do you, I guess.
Check this out. It says, turns out all of humanity is related to a single couple.
This is that Mitochondrial Eve nonsense, I swear to fuck.
A new study reveals that all humans are descendants of the same man and woman.
Oh, it's even worse than the Mitochondrial Eve nonsense. We're like 4 levels deep in the telephone game at this point. For classic Powell fans, this might be a familiar one. This is the one where, in Science Falsely So Called, Matt misunderstood an article on Tech Times that misunderstood the study. Well, that wasn't deep enough apparently, so now we've got Matt misunderstanding a New York Times article that misunderstood a Tech Times article that misunderstood the study. As a quick recap, this study looked at the mitochondrial DNA of about 100,000 animal species and found that 90% of them experienced mitochondrial uniformity sometime between 1 and 200,000 years ago. Their conclusion was, essentially, that this means that the average lifespan of a species as a whole is about 1 to 200,000 years. Honestly, if this weren't a surprising conclusion, this would have just been a normal paper doing normal science stuff. In this case, they set out to determine if mitochondrial DNA is even useful when defining species. Like, the paper is literally called, "Why Should Mitochondria Define Species?" But the news outlets saw the sentence, "The extant population, no matter what its current size or similarity to fossils of any age, has expanded from mitochondrial uniformity within the past 200,000 years," and ran with, "Some big event wiped out most life 200,000 years ago." despite that not actually being even close to what the paper said. The reporting on this one was so bad that the authors felt the need to add a clarifying note to the top of the paper, so now when anyone goes back to the original, which sadly doesn't happen anywhere near as often as it should, the first thing they'll see is, "This study is grounded in and strongly supports Darwinian evolution, including the understanding that all life has evolved from a common biological origin over several billion years. This work follows mainstream views of human evolution. We do not propose that there was a single Adam or Eve. We do not propose any catastrophic events." So yeah, when that's the first thing that you see when you look up the actual paper that is being cited to support a single human couple, then it's safe to say there was a miscommunication somewhere down the line. And given how sheepishly Matt is brushing past this one when it used to be what he called his trump card,
I'm going to pull out my trump card now. So Tech Times just came out with this article.
I'm gonna say that he knows how bad of an argument this is, and is just using it as padding and hoping that I won't notice it and call him out on it.
In Biology for Majors, it states that a mutation is a change that occurs in our DNA sequence due to mistakes when the DNA is copied.
Yes, that is what a mutation is. Do you think that just because they use the word mistake, that means that all mutations are always bad all the time? Have you never seen Bob Ross paint anything?
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
Evolution is a huge Bob Ross fan. The whole damn thing is a series of happy accidents.
Mutations can occur during DNA replication if errors are made and not corrected in time. Mutations can also disrupt normal gene activity and cause diseases, like cancer. Cancer is the most common human genetic disease. It is caused by mutations.
And in a surprise to nobody, he's completely skipped past all mention of any beneficial mutations, including the sentence right at the beginning that says, "This can be a bad or a good thing." Honestly, this particular textbook sounds like it's written for someone in grade 6. I actually had to double check and make sure it really is a university level textbook, and surprisingly it is. Like, yes, nobody is denying that mutations are caused by mistakes or errors during the replication process. That's literally exactly what they are. Yes, those words do have negative associations for most people, but no, that does not mean that mutations are always bad, as was explained in several places on the page that you are showing, which you had to actively cut around in order to avoid showing.
Mutations will not turn you from a frog to a prince over millions of years.
No, but that's mainly because our last common ancestor with frogs was probably one of the first tetrapods, which lived about 400 million years ago. Basal frogs didn't evolve until about 250 million years ago, so frogs are not in our ancestral lineage. But that's taking that statement more seriously than it deserves. The appropriate response to that is, what a dumb thing to say.
Mutations actually cause us to devolve.
Except when they don't. Which is all the time, actually, because devolving isn't actually a thing. Like, yeah, that one episode of Star Trek where Janeway and Paris had little lizard reptile baby things together because he broke the warp 10 barrier.
I don't know how I'm going to enter this into the log.
That's not real, Matt. That was a TV show. De-evolution or devolving isn't a thing.
In science, we're actually devolving. We're not evolving.
Citation fucking needed.
Our genetics are becoming worse, not better. The second law of thermodynamics is true.
Yeah, the second law of thermodynamics is true, but it's not applicable here. It applies in an isolated system. An isolated system is one that does not exchange matter or energy with its surroundings. A closed system can exchange energy, but not matter, and an open system exchanges both. The second law of thermodynamics, simplified, is that in an isolated system, entropy will increase over time. An isolated system, remember, is one which cannot exchange energy or matter with its surroundings. Now, Matt, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there's a big-ass fucking ball of fire in the sky that constantly provides us with a shit ton of energy. Which means that by definition, the Earth is not an isolated system. Although, given the air and space comment, I'm not even sure if I should mention that it's a big ball of fire. It's plasma that's like fusing hydrogen into helium. It's not actually like fire. It's not burning like fire. The air in space is not different from the air well, I mean, I guess it is technically. I'm off track. This is actually off track. In the video that I made fun of myself for scripting my off-track things, I am actually off track now. So, yay, progress? Anyway, back to the Earth. So, there's also the fact that, like a stream flowing down a mountain, carving its channel deeper and thus allowing more water to flow through it more efficiently, the evolution of complex systems that increase entropy faster than it would without their presence is actually a prediction of the second law of thermodynamics. Life is almost literally the universe's way of turning sunlight into poop with maximum efficiency.
That everything is tending towards chaos and not order.
Order and chaos are oversimplified colloquial terms that can help a high school student get a basic grasp on what entropy is, but entropy is actually a measurement of how many states it's possible for a system to have. The easiest example of this would be an isolated system of gas molecules. When you first set up the system, if there are concentrations of molecules, those molecules will eventually spread out and equalize across the whole system. When there is no concentration and the gases are uniformly spread out, there are more states that the system can be in that won't change anything about the system than in one where the gases are concentrated in various places in the system. So really, in a neat little plot twist, you could say that a system with maximum entropy is actually much less chaotic than a low entropy system. A universe that is nothing but a perfectly uniform cloud of hydrogen gas is way less chaotic than the one we have now, with giant space rocks hurling all over the place, smacking into each other, but it also has way more entropy than ours.
Mutations are a result of human sin.
So that time I sucked a dick mutated my DNA? Oh shit, I figured it out! The way we get real-life X-Men is with a bunch of gay orgies! Nice!
And suffering is a result of our wrong decisions in life.
Yeah, it's the baby's fault it got cancer, obviously.
The Bible says, "Wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned."
Okay, Matt, you might want to work on your reading comprehension, because that doesn't say anything about mutations. It's about death. And not only that, it appears to be getting the mythology wrong. In Genesis, it's quite clear that the way Adam and Eve would have avoided death had they not sinned was through their access to the tree of life, the tree that, according to Genesis 3:22, is what would have granted eternal life to those who eat its fruit. That's actually explicitly why they had to be kicked out of Eden. Someone who had the knowledge of good and evil and lives forever is a god. Eating the tree that gave them the knowledge of good and evil got them halfway there, so to stop them from becoming gods, they had to be denied access to the tree of life. So it's not so much that death entered the world through their sin, it was that the permanent prevention of death was denied to the world because of their sin.
In creation science, we believe that the world is 6,000 years old.
And yet, the study that you indirectly referenced earlier, in order to make the claim that Adam and Eve were real, would have had them living hundreds of thousands of years ago. And the science that got them to that time frame was the same science that got the Adam and Eve conclusion. Well, actually it wasn't, because the Adam and Eve thing wasn't a conclusion of the study. That was just something that the press ran with for clicks. But if we pretend it was in the study, then if the study were flawed enough to conclude that the things happened on a timescale that was off by 2 orders of magnitude, then it's flawed enough that we can't rely on any of its conclusions. So either the study was reliable and the Earth has to be at least a couple 100,000 years old, but realistically much older, or it was unreliable and thus cannot be used to draw any conclusions. But such is the nature of creationism. They must pick and choose what data to pay attention to, because the picture painted by looking at all the data is one that they cannot tolerate.
But in evolution, they believe that the world is 13.7 billion years old.
This might seem like a minor nitpick, but you should probably differentiate between the potential meanings of the word world. In this case, it seems to be meaning universe, but generally world would be used to refer specifically to the Earth, which is a mere child of 4.5 billion years old. I get that in creationism, the Earth was made first and then the rest of the universe was created around it a couple days later, so you have to pretend like the two are interchangeable in order to avoid the obvious absurdity of the way the Bible says that God did it, but that doesn't really fly.
And there are many indicators in nature that show us that the Earth is not billions of years old.
Ooh, are we gonna get the moon as a clock thing? Please do that. It's just hilariously wrong. Sadly, he did not ever do the moon clock thing.
And one of those things is diamonds.
Aww, I wanted the moon clock thing. Like, come on, Matt, do you remember when you used to get up in front of the podium at your church and scream about people drinking Coke and playing video games while talking about how the moon would have crashed into the Earth in the past?
They can't think for themselves. They sit back and they drink Coke all day and sit behind a video game system and then wonder why, you're crazy, Brother Powell, for believing in a creator. Oh, you're insane. No, you're crazy, and you need to get off the video game system, and somebody needs to preach to them the gospel of Jesus Christ, and so that they can be saved. That's what we need. And I'm sick and tired of these stinking video games.
You were way more interesting back then. This is like you've been taking speech lessons from Grady McMurtry, which is like the most boring guy I've ever listened to. It's like, just, come on, spice it up a bit. For me, for your old pal Rhino, please.
Diamonds are made up of the most compact atomic particles in the world.
See, now here we go, back to the word world. You are now clearly referring to the Earth with the word world, because I'd imagine that the atomic particles in a neutron star are quite a bit more compact than those in diamonds. Though most compact isn't exactly a scientific term, so it's hard to say for certain, but if I assume that he means the material with the highest density, then that's actually not even true of the Earth. The densest known material on Earth is osmium. Well, that's the densest stable, naturally occurring material at least. I'm pretty sure he probably meant hardest, as that's the diamond's main claim to fame. But again, he needs to specify Earth here, as there are substances in the universe that are likely significantly harder than diamonds, like nuclear pasta, winner of the best named object in astrophysics, especially because the pasta theme carries on to its different forms, giving us nuclear gnocchi, nuclear spaghetti, nuclear lasagna, and others. It's likely the hardest material in the universe. This is why being both specific and careful with your words is important, Matt.
And even with all of our best technology, we have a hard time being able to break through them.
Yeah, that's true. It is known to be impossible to cut diamonds. That's why all diamond jewelry just includes diamonds in their natural state. It's not like there are, names for the various ways a diamond can be cut when used in jewelry, right? Come on, man. Even your previous only read the first Google result style research would have given you the answer here. Like, yeah, it took us about 1,000 years to figure out how to cut a diamond, but we've been doing it since at least the 1300s.
Well, diamonds contain C14.
Diamonds are made of carbon, which means that they would have contained C14 at their initial formation. They are also found buried in the ground, which we established in a previous installment of the series exposes them to radiation from uranium decay. The C14 in a diamond would have long ago decayed into nitrogen, which would remain trapped inside the diamond. Nitrogen impurities are a regular thing in diamonds. Upon exposure to radiation, nitrogen can be converted back into carbon-14. The carbon-14 in our atmosphere actually exists because of the process that does that. Nitrogen in the atmosphere gets hit by cosmic rays, which converts it to carbon-14. So, surround a diamond with slightly radioactive material, and you're bound to get at least a handful of nitrogen atoms converted into carbon-14 through its interaction with radiation. Easy peasy.
Now remember, C14 only lasts for 50,000 years. And so, if C14 is in diamonds, and C14 is constantly exiting diamonds, why is it still in there?
Because it's not exiting the diamond, Matt. It remains within it as nitrogen, which has the potential to turn back into carbon-14. But also, the most prominent time a creationist tried to carbon date diamonds, they had to modify the carbon dating process, because diamonds are not combustible, and even with their modified process, they obtained carbon levels that were within the typical margin of error for AMS carbon-14 detection, which effectively means that they didn't find any carbon-14. So, yeah.
If you Google how old are diamonds, it will tell you that they're between 1 and 3.5 billion years old.
Oh, god damn it, we're back to glancing at the first result of a Google search? Fuck off with your lazy-ass research, Matt. Okay, Google your friend Tommy McMurtry. You know what the first result will be? It's gonna be a website saying that we don't actually know whether or not he's attracted to pumpkins sexually.
One of the other things that we find consistently is helium inside of rock crystals. Now, these helium bubbles are actually slipping out of the rocks over time. They're very unstable.
Unstable, when talking about elements, usually refers to their half-life. Helium is perfectly stable in this sense, but yes, it does slowly travel upwards through the Earth's crust.
It can get caught in natural gas pockets where it will essentially stay until we drill it out. But because of how slowly it's produced, it is a finite resource that we will run out of eventually.
And so, why is it that certain rock crystals are loaded with helium?
Well, there are numerous problems with the research that came to that conclusion, which was part of the same research that found the carbon-14 in diamonds. They made mathematical errors, ignored data that didn't fit their conclusions, didn't account for the possibility of excess helium, a huge problem as helium is known to permeate through zircon crystals and get stuck in the lattice, a tiny number of samples used to draw sweeping conclusions, a requirement for the decay rates to have been sped up to the point that enough heat would have been generated during the speed up to vaporize the entire Earth, and more. Like, seriously, that is just a tiny sliver of the problems with the excess helium claim. There is a whole 50,000-word essay pointing out way more than that by geochemist Dr. Kevin Henke. That is basically a short novel that is completely about the things that the guys who found too much helium in the rocks got wrong. So, yeah, there are reasons why there would be too much helium in a zircon, but none of those reasons were adequately accounted for by the RAPE project, so the results are sketchy, to say the least.
And you can even go to different places and see the bubbles in these rocks.
Okay, but even if I assume that those bubbles you're showing are actually helium bubbles and not literally any of a bunch of different things that can make bubbles in crystals, seeing a bubble does not actually mean that there's more helium there than could otherwise be accounted for. It just means that there is currently a helium bubble in the crystal. Without a more thorough examination, that's literally it.
If these rocks are millions of years old, there wouldn't be any helium left inside of them.
That's not even a little bit true. Helium is one of the byproducts of uranium and thorium decay. It happens slowly, but it does still happen. Every time a radioactive element decays through alpha decay, a new helium atom is born, though it's ejected from the parent at about 5% the speed of light, causing it to strip a bunch of atoms of their electrons as it crashes through them before finally settling down to inert helium. So no, we don't expect all helium to be gone in samples that are billions of years old. Quite the contrary, we would expect to find very little helium in samples of only a few thousand years old, with older samples containing more helium, to a point.
And so that means that they also were created recently.
No, it doesn't. It just means that you're an idiot.
But if you Google how old are crystals, they say that it's supposedly the oldest scrap of Earth's crust.
Jesus fucking Christ, Matt, come on! Not all crystals are the same goddamn age! Fuck, man, I have grown crystals from those science project kits that you get for kids. Those are crystals in the exact same way that zircons are crystals. It's just a different kind of crystal. Hell, I still have the bismuth crystals that I grew back in April just so I could joke about farting bismuth into existence. These crystals are only 5 months old. I guarantee you there are crystals that are older than that, because, that's how time works. So yeah, Google wouldn't know about my 5-month-old crystals when you ask how old are crystals. Honestly, if you told me that this part of the video is just included as a cover for when his wife found him Googling the age of a porn star named Crystal, I'd believe it. But yeah, the oldest terrestrial zircon crystal we found is about 4.4 billion years old. No word on how much helium was in that particular sample, so I'm not sure why it's even relevant here, but sure, we found a 4.4 billion year old zircon crystal. Therefore, the Earth is 6,000 years old, obviously. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Bill Garrett, who says, based on how creepy that was, Cameron is presumably capturing Christianity with a chloroform-soaked rag to the mouth. Perfect comment, no notes. Mwah. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go to surfshark.deal/rhino to get 4 extra months for free. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Surus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Except this past Wednesday and probably this Wednesday coming because of, vacation time with kids or something, so... yeah. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorships manager. Thanks to this week's PayPal heroes, Charles, David, and Patricia. And special thanks as always to my patrons, James Mazzaros, John Roth, Daydream Lover, Michael Snyder, Catherine Spencer Mills, Zyrk, Andrew Orok, and all the rest.
Who are the helium that escaped from the zircon that is my channel. If you'd like to fly through the atmosphere and run away into outer space, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!
in order to make the claim that Adam and Eve